All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with the next panel. We had a great panel, or a great speaker on ports. We're going to keep with the port theme, and we're going to go with airports this time around. And it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the panel, Carson Good, who's president of Good Capital Group. Carson is a longtime advisory board member for the Bergstrom Center, so we're happy to have him up here. Carson?
Good evening. Good morning. So let's put that down here. I don't know if this does the clickers or not. Appreciate y'all coming. We have guests here on the panel, they're very special people, and I think this is exciting that we're keying right off after the port discussion. First is Mr. Tom Draper, who has been the head of operations. He started out as a fireman at the Orlando airport many years ago. He's been the head of operations for us for a long time, I won't say. And our last CEO retired a few weeks ago, and he is good enough to act as the acting CEO of the Orlando airport right now, and he is my hero every morning and day. Tom, grab a seat. Peter Ricondo. Pete is with Ricondo and Associates. He's an engineer by training. He's built he and his brother have built a very sizable company. They're based technically in Chicago, but big offices. You're from Miami. And they do airport work, design, construction, logistics on a planning side from Dubai to Shanghai and everywhere in between. Thank you, Pete. Matt Chesnut. Matt is with Space Florida, which is an agency authority of the state of Florida. And Matt has been building the Space Florida program, which has got some really exciting, innovative things going on, which he's going to tell us about. Lastly, Florida Secretary of Transportation, Kevin Thibault. Secretary Thibault has lived in Florida, originally came from Massachusetts. He's an engineer by training. He has designed airports. He's overseen construction in airports. He was the Deputy Secretary of Transportation, in fact, when the tunnel was built between the Miami airport and the Port of Miami, speaking of connecting. He was appointed by Governor DeSantis as Secretary of Transportation a couple years ago. We brought him back from the private industry 3 years ago. And has been building an integrated transportation system of all modes throughout the state of Florida. He's actively interfaced with Tom Draper, for instance, for 3 years, and the other leaders of Miami Airport, Tampa Airport, Jacksonville, et cetera. So we're really excited. And as many of you know, I am the chairman of the Greater Orlando Aviation Authority, which is a volunteer job. It's supposed to be a part-time job, but it hasn't been so much lately. And it will go back to that soon. But the Greater Orlando Aviation Authority is an authority. Most airports you'll find are owned by cities and counties. Technically, the Greater Orlando Airport is owned by the city of Orlando, but the authority is set up, and the authority is a relatively sovereign entity that acts, in essence, as a trustee for the city of Orlando. We have 7 board members, and we'll discuss that a little bit, because governance has a lot to do with how some of these airports can operate. So I got excited about transportation since I was a kid. My dad was a maritime lawyer down in Miami, and he was also a big history wonk, and he would drill into my head the discussions on how ports built cities, built societies, starting from the Babylonians on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, because stuff can move a lot easier by water, people found. A lot less bandits attacking them, a lot less wheels coming off, a lot more stuff could be moved. And so great cities built, as we all know, around ports. And whether that was London, Rome, and on into the United States, from New York to New Orleans, and this is where great cities built. Ports that were inland, because of big, wide, navigable rivers like the Seine River, and the Thames, allowed the ports to be closer to the center of a country, which got it closer to goods and services, which in those days was agriculture. And I think it created a bigger boom for a larger area by putting the port, like Paris is, closer to the center of the country. And we'll discuss that a little on airports. So that's how I got interested in ports, and I got interested in airplanes. My grandfather was a pilot, and living in Miami, he was also a contractor. And he found, before the interstates were built, he found he could do construction jobs in the Bahamas, in Guantanamo Bay, in Puerto Rico, and had this fabulous new, this right after World War II, idea of being able to build a construction company that could build in faraway, hard to get to places because of airplanes. And so that sort of generated the excitement here. I want to start with Pete Ricondo. And I want to do is ask some questions so y'all can understand everybody's expertise, and then we'll open. How many people here are developers? How many of those developers are industrial or airport related? How many are brokers that are industrial or airport related? Okay. Pete, tell us, you're an engineer. You grew up in Miami, right?
Yep.
What got you excited about airports?
Well, to me, what's been fascinating, and I've been working on airports now for 31 years, so I got a long run in this business. And there's a phrase that you hear in the airport environment, which is, you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. And I can confirm to you, after 31 years, you cannot overstate that. Airports are mini cities in and of themselves. And if there's one thing that airports, unfortunately, whether it's governance, whether it's the regulatory environment they operate in, at least in the US, developing any project on an airport is not a fast endeavor. And those are developers, and it goes against everything you believe in. And the reason I say that is that creates far more importance for airport operators and managers to understand what is the long-range plan, the vision for the plan that has a collection of 20, 30 projects that are cohesive in and of themselves, but are not here to solve today's problems. Many airports, irrespective of how they're governed, they cannot deliver a project any sooner than 4 to 7 years. And that's been across the board. I've heard that bucket. But that tells you you're automatically from the get-go looking 4 to 7 years out. And you're not going to build something so it becomes dated the day you open it. So you're looking 20 years into the future, 40 years into the future, and you're trying to map what that airport environment is going to be at and what it needs to be for the community it's serving, and then developed an incremental program that are essentially projects that you're implementing over time but have sustainability and resiliency to withstand as the airport grows.
What do you have to say about the economic impact of airports to a region?
You know, the economic, maybe I'll pivot real quick to slide 3 and cite some examples.
Slide 3?
Yeah, I think slide 3.
You're going to be controlling the slides back there.
Okay. So mind you, this is only the U.S. airport environment. So U.S. airports, and this is a study at Commission Airports Council International, it's an industry, the airports alone, that contribute $1.4 trillion a year in terms of direct and indirect benefits. The more important fact to that, and this is a 2017 measure that I think got stronger into 2019. The interesting fact about that is 40% of that is what the airport generates in its footprint. And when you think about multiplier effects and what it does in indirect benefits outside the community, that other component is a remaining 60%. So many of you that are in this business can appreciate why the airport spawns so much economic activity, not simply by what it's able to bring into a community via air service, but by the businesses that it develops out there. So giving you some examples of, if I can give you that, let me switch over a little bit to the international side
Yeah.
and then bring it into the domestic to kind of
What
put
I'm going to cut you off for a second. What I've learned is that while we may all love certain airports in the United States, we think Orlando Airport's a fantastic airport. A lot of people in Miami think Miami's a great airport. Airports in Europe and Asia and the Middle East are just phenomenally move people faster, more efficient, better use of technology, way ahead of the United States, and have been for the last 20, 30 years or more. So tell us about when in Orlando, we want to catch up to them.
And mostly I'm going to cite a couple, probably 3 examples, and then bring it together about the common theme of those 3 examples, and then correlate it to the U.S., because I think it's probably what we can all relate to a little better. And I'm using airports that some of you, if you haven't been there, at least you're familiar with and heard of. Dubai is one example. And all of you have seen the great images, the grandiose development that Dubai has invested in. But there's some things that I noted down that I thought maybe you all didn't know. So I'm going to
You do work in Dubai.
Yes.
You've been doing work for a long time.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir. So Dubai International Airport, the primary airport in Dubai, opened in the 1960s. So that's in the 1960s. Now I'm going to give you some comparison of what happened in that airport in that region between 1985 and 2019, a 35-year span, which is relatively narrow in the airport vernacular. By 2019, Dubai International was the 4th busiest airport in the world in 2019. What it grew from 1985 to 2019 in terms of passengers, in 1985, the airport processed 3.9 million passengers. What does that mean? That was basically, think of it like a Jacksonville International Airport. By 2019, they were serving 86.4 million passengers. That's more commensurate with Atlanta Hartsfield International Airport in a very small window of time. The airport is landlocked like Miami is, and they have the need, and they put into works for a long time, the notion of developing a secondary airport. And that airport is Dubai World Central Airport. What is the scale of that airport as a secondary airport to Dubai International? It has 2 metrics that constitute that landmass for that second airport. 17,000 acres is the aviation component. How big is that? That is about the size of DFW, the second largest U.S. airport in terms of landmass. And it has an additional 18,000 acres of land developed for what we call commercial, retail, ancillary type of development. Everything you've heard Dubai developed that's not generally on the aviation side. By the time they finish that second project, they anticipate that both airports combined will contribute approximately 37% of the GDP of that country, which is a monster number simply allocated to 2 airport facilities.
After their oil is gone, which is soon,
Right.
that percentage will be much higher, right?
Absolutely.
The airport is really the driver.
Yep.
Once oil's gone.
Absolutely. It's a catalyst for activity, business, and tourism into that region. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples that have also come into fruition recently, just before the pandemic. Some of you may have heard of Project Jewel at Singapore Airport. You know, that was a $1.4 billion, 1.4 million square foot development of about $1.5 billion. When they opened that facility up in March in 2019, or thereabouts, they are already experiencing, in that 6-month period, 50 million visitors to that component of the airport. And that facility was developed by design to be catering to 60% of tourism activity, 40% local activity.
That's like a Disney World.
Absolutely. So 40% was not just for the airport environment, it was for the local community and the local traffic.
This part of the Singapore airport has giant, huge waterfalls and massive ficus trees and landscaping, and it's pretty exciting.
And that ties to an important point, which is also what Hong Kong Sky City is doing. They're developing a similar development is going to be supposedly phased over 2024 to 2028, which is going to bring development in terms of convention center, retail, commercial facilities. Same idea, same notion. Remember, Hong Kong is in an island, so now you're bringing in, you're catering to more of the airport environment, but making that your final stop. So I'll bring you those 3 examples just to bring in mind one notion that I think it's a realization that the European airports have brought in. One is the idea that their mission in life is no longer to get an individual or traveler to land at the airport and the mission's done. We've talked a lot about the last mile, point to point. So they've realized that the idea is not just to get you to the airport, but to get you to wherever you're trying to go at each of those cities as their destinations. And the real component is become the connectivity part that helps facilitate that or complement the air service. The other thing we've got to recognize from these international airports is, like, unlike U.S. airports, they do not receive much in terms of government funding, government assistance. They operate like a private enterprise. And couple that with the fact that, contrary to what we see in U.S. airports, these international airports are about 80 to 90% international traffic, 10 to 20% domestic. You got a longer dwell time of a passenger in an airport. So to the chairman's comment, the notion went, you know what, our purpose is not to provide amenities, but to provide an experience, a service, an offering. So it's a lot broader spectrum, which led to a lot of what became broad-scale commercial development at these airports for revenue enhancement, but also to make the point-to-point easier. If you can get to the airport and your end stop for a convention can be within a mile of that airport, and you can get there by rail, they've accomplished part of their mission.
Point to point, looking at it, we'll move to Secretary Thibault a little bit later on that. I mean, the biggest impact an airport has to a community is access. Somebody can get on a plane in Atlanta, if your office happened to be, or your house happened to be near the airport, and you can quickly go almost anywhere you want for the day. We have the president of South State Bank here, and they do meetings in the Atlanta airport because people can fly in everywhere, quickly go in for a meeting for the day and get out. That is why corporate headquarters relocate to Dallas and relocated to Atlanta, because you can quickly get in and out. But that quickly goes away when the surface transportation is a mess, and you can't find signage, and you can't figure out where you're going, and you get clogged up at TSA. So, right, and they're solving that in Europe now. How is Europe more efficient? How are those airports, real quick, and we need to move on to the next, and we'll come back to you. Real quickly, what do we need to do to become more efficient like the Europeans are doing? We can't do the same thing the Asians do for a number of reasons.
Right. There's a couple of things that I think you got to emanate.
We have this thing called rights here.
If you think of the goal of any U.S. airport, any airport for that matter, and for you as a passenger, will be to get to the front door of that airport and get as seamlessly, uninterruptedly, and as efficiently as you can to the post-security, the gate side of it. We got a couple of things that get in the way in the middle of that. One is our security checkpoints is a big part of that. That is not governed by airports anymore like it used to be many years ago. That is now a TSA, federal government operated function. The European airports don't deal with that. That still falls on the airport side. And what they do is they have the ability, or they have the focus more on prioritizing the customer experience if that is the pinch point, and whether they add more footprint, more machines to expand the processing capacity that way, or they invest more in technology that facilitates that movement. They're able to do that more fluently than relying on the third party, like TSA does here in the States. So we're seeing that in airports, and Tom can speak to that at some point. Orlando International is improving in that area because they're getting better machines, technology, and better configuration in some of the new terminals they're building that allows 20% enhancement in that processing capacity.
So, Tom?
I think if I could just add on to that, because that's a great point. Just like you all here, you know your client, you know the preferences of your client. Our client is 140,000 people, typically on a daily basis, but that's still not an excuse.
On a daily basis.
On a daily basis, yes, sir. So last year we did just a little over 40 million people went through the airport. So but I don't think that's an excuse. I think that's a crutch that sometimes the airports rely on, and I think it's the onus is on us, and we took this on years ago from our leadership, was to know who our customer is and to understand what they want. And we study the travel path, the journey, all the time. So we're constantly looking at that. So for the business traveler, you're very savvy in traveling, so we need to have a path that's very uninterrupted and that the Disney family is not anywhere near you. So, and we work that all the time. And I think that that's the biggest thing now that more and more airports are doing. So, and the journey now has moved from the curb now into the community. So it's moved to downtown, and how are you getting to the airport? You know, rideshare, where we've worked with CFX, you know, on the front door of the airport and all the exchanges to make that easier to come in and out of the airport. We have the rail coming, but I think that journey, you keep incorporating more of your community partners, because the journey is where the people are, and that's downtown or out into the community, and study the path for them coming into the airport.
Tim Gray will jump up and down and tell you that everybody is going to be at Lake Nona very soon when they move there. But we are getting, that is part of why Disney located right next to the airport instead of on the 30,000 acres they own. And this is why KPMG, and I was with JLL at the time, went all throughout the country and chose to go right next to the Orlando airport.
Absolutely.
Get it out. How do you, first of all, what gets you excited? I know you started out as a fireman, but what gets you excited every morning about running the Orlando airport?
So I grew up
By the way, it's a $600 million a year, takes no government money for its operation. Every once in a while we lean on people for grants. But they're grants, they're not operations. We don't have taxing, we don't tax. So it's $600 million of very complex operation, a $3 billion south terminal that we're just finishing construction on. So what gets you excited?
I grew up in Delaware in a small town near the Dover Air Force Base, and planes flew over my head all the time. So and my wife to this day still laughs. I've been with the Aviation Authority. I've had the fortunate to be there for 32 years, and I still stop and when I hear a siren and see the fire truck, and I still look up all the time at planes. So, you know, I'm an aviation junkie. So I've been very fortunate to move around and learn a lot in the industry. But I think that we take that, and I think that we're fortunate to have a wide variety of folks from different varied backgrounds. So we take that. So when we're talking about that journey and we're sitting there and we're trying to brainstorm, or we're trying to see how we can best suit the customer and moving around our facility, I think we all bring that background to that. I think the other piece is that years ago we had the leadership had the foresight to step away from the airlines, because in most airports the airlines control the budget of the airport. So they're usually a financial supporter, a financial backer of some means into the airport, whether they've built the terminal or they're backing some of the capital improvement programs. We saw an ability for us to do that. We knew that we could do that with some commercial development, and we could help in that revenue side, and we did that. So now we control the gates, we control the facility, we operate and maintain the facility, and at any time in the North Terminal and the 93 gates that we operate on a daily basis, we can put any airline on any gate, and the airlines have signed an airline agreement to that. So now,
what happens in Atlanta? Does it happen that way, or Miami?
no, sir.
You have empty gates sitting in Miami, Atlanta, most every other city, because an airline controls that section.
Difficult to maximize
And somebody else is sitting
facility.
on the tarmac trying to get into their gate.
And then the enticement for the airlines to do that, because of course the airlines, they don't want to do that. They want an exclusive gate so that they have all their equipment there, and we understand that. So we came up with some variations of that, and then we also profit share with them. So at the end of the year, we were confident enough in the beginning that we would be better than our budget, and our revenue would be stronger than our expenses. And that after we take the first certain amount of money and put that back into capital improvement projects of the facility, of which the airlines participate because we meet with them and we discuss that, we collaborate on that, and then the rest of it we share on percentage with the airlines. So, which they're very happy. You know, who isn't happy when you get a little money back?
So we have more leverage, and that allows us to grow. Do we have to get any airlines approval to build the $3 billion South Terminal?
No, sir. No, that's totally.
Do we have to get the state's approval? No.
Yes, we did.
We did?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we have
I
to
was
go
going to
through
check
all
to
the.
see if you got the
They
right answer.
regulated it.
Go
We
through
certainly
that.
regulated it, but
Yes.
we did it all through bonds. We just floated another.
Yeah.
in the
How you
middle-
finance it is your decision.
Right. But you do have to go through the processes. I mean, there's governance processes
Yes,
for all of
it's
that.
permitting, yes, and approvals.
There's strict in your area, in the audience area here of being a developer, there's a ton of land on our airport. I mean, there's a lot of land on our airport that is developable, and everybody comes and says, hey, you know, we should develop this. But what a lot of people don't understand is that the FAA has very strict governance on what that property can be used for, what you could use it for, and we have to work with them. Now, the FAA and the federal government here in recent years has become more open-eyed and is more willing to step out on other related projects to help grow the airport. But in looking at the Aerotropolis or in looking at some of these airports in Asia and stuff where you have apartment buildings and everything on airport property, the FAA has serious concerns over that. So we have to be careful of that. But I think the biggest thing is for the airports is coming up with that outlying or that capital investment in trying to improve the property that's attractive for you all to develop.
Peter, how many acres is the Miami airport?
Is approximately 3,300 acres.
3,300 acres?
Yep.
And how big is Tampa?
Tampa is also about 3,300 acres.
How big is LAX, for instance?
LAX, I do not know off the top of my head.
They're larger than us.
How big is Orlando?
We're a little over 11,000 acres. So, and I'm
you
glad you
can-
didn't ask me about those other questions, those other airports, because I wouldn't
You
know.
can
but-
fit in the footprint of the Orlando airport, you could fit Miami International and JFK and LAX. So we have room to grow.
Well,
Absolutely.
and locally, you can fit Miami. Florida is very unique. Just to give you an example, somebody may not be familiar, there's 493 commercial service airports. Of those 490, only 30 are considered large hubs. Those are the busiest airports in the country. Chicago's, New York, LAX, that group. Florida is the only state that has 4 of those. So
Four of the top 30.
4 of the top 30. They are Tampa, Orlando, Miami, and Fort Lauderdale. If you take Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and Tampa collectively, it's 8,000 acres. Orlando's 11,000. You can fit 3 of those large hub airports and have 3,000 acres available left over at Orlando, to give you the perspective of scale.
Right. And the airline control, Tom, I'm going to just touch back on that. So tell me, Peter, what percentage of the Miami airport is American Airlines?
It's 60 to 65%.
What percentage of Atlanta is Delta?
About 80, 85%.
85%. So they got some swing.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know what they can do without Delta's approval. Very little, right?
very little.
Houston, what percentage of that is American? United, excuse
United.
me.
Not sure. They may be pushing about 50, I think.
So, Tom, who is our largest carrier by percentage?
Our largest carrier is Southwest, and they're at about probably 28% right now. We're not a hub airport, of course. I think everybody understands that. But our piece is we're an origination and destination airport, so we don't have a lot of connecting traffic. And that continues to grow, especially as our international grows coming out of South and Central America. But I think that the biggest thing with us is it's point to point. Because now in the travel pattern that everybody is traveling, nobody wants to connect anywhere. So the point to point is becoming the more premium flight, because you want a direct flight, because you don't want to have the delay or the connection time, in another airport and move around. I think that was something that was big that came out in this COVID era that we're in, is that the point-to-point flight has become the priority.
We've roughly been the 4th largest destination airport in the country. Destination means somebody comes out and gets in their car and goes. Well, we're now second.
We're second, yes, sir.
We were 4th 3 years ago, now we're second.
Yes, sir. Sorry about
in the
that.
whole
Yes, sir.
country.
Yes, sir.
We're the biggest airport by volume in Florida.
Right.
And during the first 6 months of 2021, last year, we were the number 1 in the country, thanks in part to Ron DeSantis for keeping us open. And I think all the airports in Florida, Peter, our Secretary, I believe all the airports in Florida are fully recovered.
For the most part. We saw very early on in late 20, actually, early 21, as you saw here with Orlando, anything that had a destination. The airports that were Suds and Sun saw a huge increase, right? Those like in Panama City, those in Daytona.
Right.
Those saw that quick rebound because people had a place to go, right? They wanted to go to that destination. And those that were passing through, not so much. And now they're all catching up as well, but it was a different dynamic back then.
Matt, tell us about, and we're going to wrap up with Secretary Thibault's overall integrated plan. Tell us about what is Space Florida, and I've heard it called, I got excited when the Secretary called me and he said, I got Matt to come speak, and you must be looking for a grant too. No.
They already get it.
We already have it.
Come speak with us, it took something.
The check's in the mail already.
Checks in the mail.
We've already spent it all.
But I've heard it called Mile Marker Zero. It's really exciting stuff. Some space mining, space manufacturing, space tourism. Tell me what y'all are doing and how it's impacting the community.
Absolutely, thank you. Mile Marker Zero, that's an interesting term. Just a general overview, Space Florida is the state's spaceport development authority. We're an independent special district of the state. Our jurisdictional boundary is that whole area you see on the map, the whole state of Florida. We operate similar type to the airport authority, port authority, as an independent special district, have some of the same duties and responsibilities and programs that we can use. The state of Florida does designate space as a form of transportation. As the Secretary pointed out, the state does provide funding from a grant forms to grow the aerospace infrastructure in the state, so we continue to be a premier launch provider and providing areas for launch in the country. We launched 2 rockets this week. ULA launched on Monday and SpaceX launched again yesterday, I believe. That activity, why it's important is that's, I believe, 8 launches this year in 9 weeks. Early on in the year, we'll get a lot more launches because the weather's more predictable, as opposed to later in the year. I think last year at this time, we were 1 launch every 9 days. We're like 1 launch every 7 days right now, and it's going to continue to grow. We did 31 launches each of the last 2 years. I believe there's right around 50 on the launch manifest this year. So we probably won't get there, probably be in the mid-30s again because everything does get pushed and things happen. So the spaceports, while we do focus on, there's 4 spaceports, if you didn't know, in the state of Florida, there's 4 licensed spaceports, obviously Cape Canaveral Spaceport Station, Kennedy Space Center with the vertical launches that we have out of there, historically a historic launch complex. Also within Kennedy Space Center is the old shuttle landing facility, which Space Florida controls. It's now the launch and landing facility, which is just right there inside Kennedy Space Center. Just over the Indian River, in that circle around Cape Canaveral Spaceport, is Space Coast Regional Spaceport and Airport. Space Coast Regional Airport did get a spaceport license approved in November 2021. They are what they call horizontal launch, so we obviously see the rockets on vertical launch, but there's a sector of launching that will do vertical, where it'll be an aircraft takeoff just like an airplane, and either it'll go hypersonic or supersonic after that point, or it will launch something off of the craft. If you see, the real Virgin Galactic has been the one that's really been pushing that.
Now it just takes a runway.
Yeah, it just takes a runway. Yeah.
How long a runway does it take?
Just like any aircraft, and it depends on the payload and the fuel needed and where they need to get to. A lot of times the runway length is not as important as where the runway is located and where the safety zones are for some of those the propellants and stuff that are on those spacecraft that are going. The fourth one is Cecil Spaceport up in Jacksonville. That is a former Cecil Field. It's part of Cecil Field. It's got a small section of the spaceport. The key to those designations of those spaceport really is what drives the grant money that comes from Florida Department of Transportation. It allows us, the state, to invest in partnership with private entities going in to develop that infrastructure that's needed to continue to keep us the most competitive launch site, not only in the country, but in the world. United States is just second behind China in the number of launches, not by far, but China will continue to do more. But there are several other launch facilities in the United States, Texas, Virginia, Georgia's talking about building one, California, Alaska. I've seen plans for one in Michigan. So we're seeing more and more launch sites being added. But however, we have that infrastructure in place, and the state of Florida has done a really good job of making sure, working with the federal government to ensure that our spaceport infrastructure is kept critical. There's two other spaceport territories. They are not eligible for the grant, but Cape San Blas, which is just out in the Gulf, east of Tyndall Air Force Base, and then Eglin Air Force Base. The Gulf of Mexico is a launch range, a test launch range that's critical for what they do over on from the Northwest Florida area with testing. Eglin and Cape San Blas, both not recently, but historically, have been test launch sites for rockets and other type of spacecraft or craft. But so also with that, we are able to do work around the state. Can we go to the next slide, please, Secretary? So we talk about a Florida spaceport system, and while we understand the spaceports over at Kennedy Space Center, at Cecil Field, and otherwhere, we look at this as Florida as, we call mile marker zero, very similar to what you talked about earlier with how London was in the 1500s, out ready to form seaports. We see Florida that way. Frank DeBell, RCO, has talked about that as a spaceport site, as Florida being that port to space. And this is just a graphic. Don't think that's where everything's going on there from a manufacturing side, but how critical the entire state's going to be to continue not only to what Florida's putting in to invest in those spaceports, but also to make sure that we can provide companies that need to come here almost a holistic of availability to do the manufacturing. When they're launching stuff, you're able to get their freight in. The seaports are going to become critical. If you saw where SpaceX brought down their first two crew capsules, they took them to the Port of Pensacola. Also sitting in the Port of Pensacola is a ship that Blue Origin's fitting for their New Glenn project. That's going to be a recovery ship. We're seeing Port Canaveral, also obviously due to its location, but we're going to see more and more of those seaports needing to be used as we get in there, because you're going to see offshore launch platforms. You're going to see offshore recovery, and so that becomes critical. And as we continue we just need to make sure that we have the supply chain in there. So Space Florida really is there to grow this aerospace sector, this spaceport system throughout the state of Florida. Secretary, if we go to the next slide. If you can see, like right now, we're doing projects all over the state. This is probably about 6 months old. We've got more in there, but these are active projects that we are doing in Space Florida with companies. And what we can do is we provide access to capital for these companies as it relates to development of facilities and equipment. So we're able to go out, either build it's all new facilities or purchase new equipment and lease back with Space Florida being the legal and equitable owner, leasing back to the companies for some significant tax efficiencies and tax exemptions that come through Florida statute. One of our key assets, and I know we talk with developers, is we only build on what we call special dirt. So we will only do projects on government-owned property. Primarily, the most government-owned property in the state is airports. So we look at a lot of activity in and around airports and
Like
growing.
Cecil Field.
Yeah, and growing those areas around airports, whether it be aviation, MRO activity, space, manufacturing, any of those things that go in there. There's a lot of defense stuff that we can get into. And we put those around the state to provide, it's not an incentive, but it really helps drive the cost of development of capital assets and equipment to do the project and reducing costs long term, which our bottom line is to grow that aerospace sector, meaning jobs, additional capital investment outside of what was brought in to grow that activity. So that's really, from a Space Florida standpoint, we always consider the launch, and we love the launches. Those are awesome to see, but our footprint throughout the state, really what we're trying to do is grow this holistically.
Secretary Thibault, how does the Florida Department of Transportation tying all this together? I mean, you're planning sidewalks and bike paths all the way to spaceports. What have you been doing and
What have I been doing? Man. So, I am the wrap-up of this hour session, okay? So I'm going to engage the audience. I like how many of you, by the way, are taking notes on your phone. That's got to be what you're doing, right? I see that glare of the screen on your face. I see it. So I put this up there as more of a did you know about airports, right? And it's a little bit about, Pete mentioned a little bit about this earlier and about the different airports and all that, but it's all about how do we move people and goods throughout this state, right? The department's mission is really all about that. How do we efficiently and safely move people and goods? And so when you think about that, you think about then you have to truly look at all the modes. And we have definitely evolved in this state. This state, those of you, many of you have been a resident of this state more than 20 years? Raise your hand. Okay. Wow, even the students, that's good. Okay, we get some native Floridians here, great. We were primarily 20 plus years ago a modal choice of highways. Let's be honest, right? We were just about highways. We are the lowest single occupant vehicle state in probably the country. Well, maybe some of the rural parts of the country, but it really is, we were really focused on the highway mode. But as we have grown, we have seen that we have to change that mindset. If we're going to move people efficiently and effectively and goods, we got to start thinking things differently. And so our development of our Florida Transportation Plan was really saying, how can we do this in a multimodal sense? And so we started to focus on funding the other modes of transportation, including spaceports, including our freight railroads, including our airports, as you heard from Pete and Tom earlier, as well as our transit, as well as our seaports. We are a major partner in each one of those modes. Now, I'm not at the switch determining where the bus goes or where the planes land and leave or where those ports, Captain Vickerman gave a great presentation earlier, by the way, and he was right on with a lot of the challenges that are out there. Because we have 14 deep water seaports in this state, so we've got a lot of activity going on. And our ports are open, by the way, and we can handle more. But we're not in control of those different areas, but we are acting as a partner to make sure that goods are getting to market and that people are getting to their destination as safe and as efficiently as you can. So our investment is all about how do we keep making that happen. And so as you look at the growth of this state where about 1,000 people a day are calling Florida home and 130 million visitors come each and every year, each and every one of them are looking for transportation solutions. So you have to start thinking things differently. And so our involvement, like the graphic here of the airports, we've got the same one for transit and all the other modes. It's really about what is going on and how we can become a part of that. And how we want to continue to make a part of that. And also to recognize what it does to our economy and the economic impact. Look at that statistic there, $175 billion economic impact to this state. And so when you look at what those statewide benefits are, it's not only the on-airport aviation. It's the visitor spending, clearly here. but clearly in a lot of our hubs as well. Fort Lauderdale and Miami and all that have a tremendous amount, Tampa have a tremendous amount of visitors. It's also the military spending, whether it be through our work with the spaceport and the space station, Canaveral, or Kennedy Space Center, and so on. It's really recognized that it's more than just that. And by the way, these slides were created before this presentation. I noticed the orange and blue, kind of the subtle colors here. I'm hoping you caught that. I wasn't going to change it, even though I commute back and forth from Tallahassee that doesn't like to see orange and blue too much, by the way. But as Pete mentioned earlier, the 4 large hubs, and look in their economic impact that they provide, right? And then we've got these others as well that we were showing here. But so it's a significant amount that airports do. So going back to the question at the beginning, how can airports grow your community? It's because they're evolving. Because they have to evolve. Each one of them are starting to recognize that what they've got going on there is more than just getting people to a destination. It's about what is it doing for the community as it relates to the growth in the area and what is happening around them. So if you think about what's happening here in Orlando, and you think about Lake Nona and the development that's going on there and the medical city and everything else that's going on there, it's a recognition of what's going on around us. And as the growth is occurring in this state, those of you who follow those growth trends, I'm sure you follow Bieber, you know that the large percentage of the growth in this state is going to be right here. Right? And it's not just because we got a lot of land in Osceola County or a lot of land in Sumter and Lake and all that stuff. It's just because people want to come here. People like what we have going on here. And the more we keep providing that, the more they're going to keep coming. And so then we've got to start to morph and change in how we handle that growth. And so as that centroid is changing, we realize that almost now the airport is getting to be where that centroid of population is. And even though we're the second in the country as it relates to destination, as our population grows, what's going to happen? We got our own residents now using that airport more, right? And that balance is starting to change. And their needs are going to start to change, like Tom was talking about. So our customer is changing. Now we've got to start to mix from the business traveler and the Disney traveler to our own and what their needs are. And the importance for them to get from home to the gate probably as efficiently as we can. So those are kind of the challenges and the things that we got going on, but they're to the benefit of the community. And so there's a lot going on here. Wow, we got a lot of, I can hear a pin drop in here. So, because you're afraid I'm going to ask you a question. That's what it is, right? So, that's kind of what's going. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, before we do that,
Yeah.
I asked you a question a few months ago in our interview. And he is now, we've selected him to be the upcoming CEO of the Orlando International Airport. Why the hell would, it's a hard job. That's for us, not for him. It's just like when you tell the husband, congratulations, and you tell the new wife, good luck. Congratulations to us on the board.
And then
why the hell would you want
see the in-laws and you say condolences, right, or whatever. Yeah.
Why the hell would you, what excites you about it? Why the hell would you want to do this job?
Because of what I just talked about. What is happening in this area, right? So I expect most of you have been through our beautiful Orlando International Airport, and we talk about the Orlando experience, right? And you see that everywhere. And I'm very confident that many of you have been through a number of airports, and it's just not the same. And it's not only because of
the Newark experience. You really felt like you were in Newark
yes.
when you landed there. It was authentic.
Yes.
It's better now.
Yes, I was going to say something about an airport I flew in the other day, but I won't say that. But it's a different concept, right? The perception is different. And so what's happening here in this region is I want to be a part of that. That was going back to your question, because it makes the excitement that's going on there. as Pete mentioned, it is a city. It is a microcosm, right? It's a small portion of the city. And what we got going on here is actually even unique, because very soon we're going to have intercity passenger rail coming into an airport. Right? Bright Line will be done, early the end of this year, early next year. So you can now hop on a high-speed train from here to Miami. Wearing still my DOT hat, we're finishing our negotiations from Orlando to Tampa. And as you've seen with them, they want to go beyond that, right? They want to go to Jax and so on. Clearly, when you get to Jax now, you're at the state line, right? Where can you go from here? So when you go to, those of you who've been to Europe and Asia, what are the options you have to travel? It's all mostly rail, right? That's the primary choice that they have here. That's what we're doing here. We're kind of catching up a little bit, right? But that's really the excitement about what's going on here. Because now we've created redundant systems in place to be able to move people once they get here, or if they want to come here and go where they need to go.
Questions? Scott Corbett had a question. John Ebinger, I know you got a question. We have a question? Yes.
We got 11,000 acres to leverage there, but I feel like we're competing with Miami, that has American Airlines, and Atlanta, that has Delta Airlines as hub airports, and we're kind of sandwiched in between. How do we think about in the next 10 years attracting an airline to where Orlando is more of a hub airport? We can have more direct flights in and out of Orlando rather than having to route through Miami or Atlanta.
How do our direct flights compare to Miami? Pete, either way.
I think that we go to 90 different locations now direct, and I don't know that the hub airports do that. If you're gonna put in a hub airport, it's a significant commitment from a single airline. We were never fortunate enough to do that because the Miamis and the Atlantas have a lot more age on them than our airport does, and have seen more growth because they centralized it. I think that right now that more corporate headquarters are moving here for the point-to-point that we have. So not only do we have point-to-point to get them back to where maybe their previous headquarters was or out to different parts of their operation, but we're out on all of their sales routes. At least that's what we hear from them as they come in. We have a strong relationship with the city of Orlando and with the Orlando Economic Partnership, to the point that we do a lot of meet and greets and walk these folks around in the terminal, and they ask a lot of questions about that. And that's basically the first thing that we hear from them is, how many direct flights do you have and where do you fly to? And we have a graphic, and I apologize, but I probably should have slipped that into the slide deck, of everywhere that we fly to, domestically and internationally. And that's always seems to be a benefit more than it is a hindrance on the hub airports.
Peter, how many does Miami have? Atlanta is the largest, busiest airport in the world. And it'll take a little while to catch up on that. And most of that's hub, in and out. They don't get off the plane like they do in Orlando. But Peter, how many direct flights, how do we compare to Miami on number of direct flights? Do you know?
I know market-wise, Miami served, at least in 2019, 167 markets, 108 were international, and 59 were domestic. But I'm going to take if I can, I'm going to take a little different direction, because I think it's a great question that I asked. And sometimes we attribute air service availability and breadth to a hub carrier. And you as a community, as an airport, may not necessarily want a hubbing operation. I'll tell you why. If the large propensity of that, Miami is an example, 50% of those passengers get off a plane, go through the concourse, and get on another plane, and maybe buy something in between. Many of them do not leave the airport. And that's a big consumption of activity that you are just simply passing through without really yielding a lot of economic activity. Having said that, an airport like Orlando, an origin and destination airport that doesn't have a hubbing carrier, how do you get more service into that? There's two things that feed into that for an airline. An airline will not just add service to its hubs, they will add service to communities where it can secure a big yield. And Secretary Thibault just said the biggest thing you got is a growing demographic, fast community for tourism and for business and tourism. You also have a state that's attractive from a state tax point, which is driving a lot of corporations into the state. And then the last piece that's a recipe for that is keep the airline costs at an airport low. And how do you do that? The way you do that is to maximize or expand the share of non-aeronautical revenues. So when you take the 11,000 acres of land that you got and you start building non-aviation facilities that actually provide yield and revenues for the airport, you are also lowering the airline cost structure. So you take what Secretary Thibault said, and you take a low-cost structure for the airlines, and you become a catalyst for exploring a lot of more non-stop markets.
So it's a very important mission to continue to add direct flights. And it helps. It's easier to put a corporate headquarters in Atlanta, Dallas, or Miami because of those choices. And it's something we're doing. By the way, I think we added, Tom, 17 new destinations during the middle of COVID, including Hawaii.
Yes, sir.
But it's working with the community. It's adding belly freight. If an airline is on the fence from flying to XYZ city, and we can get something manufactured on our property that generates belly freight, not a dedicated freight airplane, but in the belly of that passenger, that makes them more likely to do a passenger flight. Secretary?
No, I was going to say, Pete and I were talking earlier, too, about we got to be careful, too, when you start putting all your eggs in a basket. Look what happened with Cincinnati. Right? Their airport was so reliant on that hub. And when Delta acquired Northwest and left them behind, they are still, how many years has that been now?
Pittsburgh,
right?
when U.S. Air went under.
Right, U.S. Airways, exactly. So the diversification is also a big key. I'm sure, Tom, you've heard that, is many other options. And, brand loyalty is important for some, I get that. But we have that ability, you still have that ability here. And what we want to do is induce those carriers to say, provide more service, but you don't have to have it all beholden to one.
One more quick question. Jim Gray? Thank you very much. I appreciate you.